Hi there, I'm a mother of a child with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and I want to tell you a little bit about our journey. Today I want to talk to you about the time frame between when we got released after the first operation and before the second operation. First things first, I'm not a native speaker, that's why I'm going to miss some terminology and everything that comes with not being a native speaker. And second of all, I have no clue how to film, so I'm sorry about that too. But back to the topic. So when we left the hospital, I basically was over the moon because now it felt like I really had a child for the first time, and nobody tried to tell me what to do and how to feed my son and everything that basically came with being in a hospital and having nurses around you 24/7. Yeah, so I had a child and I was really happy, and I also was a little bit scared because when I went for walks with him, I had to check if he was still breathing, and that's weird because with my daughter, so with my firstborn, I never had that problem. I was always like, okay, nothing's going on, she's healthy and everything, and with him I was really scared and checked on him way more often than I did with my daughter, even though he was my second child. Yeah, so that was quite weird, and we also went to doctors quite often, so they had to check his weight, and they also did some screenings with his heart in order to see if something was wrong, and we actually measured his oxygen levels in his blood, and we had a table where we wrote down everything, and we had to take that with us to the doctors and show them, and so that was quite annoying. Yes, and then after 3 weeks we went to the doctors again, and they checked on him, and they were like, so they did a screening on his heart, and they were like, oh, there's a passage that's too narrow and you probably have to get into the hospital for the people to widen it via, wait, I wrote it down, with a heart catheter, cardiac trick catheter, that's what it called. I'm sorry, I'm really bad at pronouncing those words. And so after a month being at home, we went to the hospital and had that cardiac catheter. Sorry for that. And they told us, oh, he's probably going to be fine and everything's going well. And I was really nervous about the procedure, but I didn't know better. And I still would be nervous about it, and it's awful because there's so many things going through, or there were so many things that went through my head, and I was like, just please don't let there be any mistake or any spillage into his body, blood spillage. And yeah, because for me it's still a wonder how they managed to operate on those little children, because they're just a handful and he wasn't big as well. So yeah, for me it's just basically the medicine miracle, so to call it. And the procedure went well, and because he has this HLHS, they told me they are going to monitor him for 24 hours in the intensive care station, not because anything went wrong, just because of this. And they did, and everything was fine. And then we had to stay another day on a normal station, and then just shortly before they wanted to release us, they were like, his oxygen levels are dropping again, and that's not good. And so I was like, okay, what happens next? And they were like, okay, we're going to monitor him for a few more days. And so they did monitor him for a few more days, and they were like, maybe tomorrow, and that dragged on for 2 weeks, and he had another, cardiac catheter and they widened it again, but it wouldn't stick. And so after, I don't know if it almost were 3 weeks, they told us, well, no, you can't go home because his oxygen levels are too bad. You have to stay in the hospital. That was one of the big things that were like, okay, we need to stay in the hospital, that's okay, but always not knowing if we could go home the next day or the next 2 days or 3 days, or if we had to stay there. That was really nerve-wracking. And another thing that happened in the hospital was that he stopped drinking normal again. So I couldn't breastfeed, but I pumped and gave him the bottle. And he started to not get enough anymore. And so they had to tube feed him, or I had to tube feed him again. And I got really good at tube feeding. But I always gave him whatever he could drink with a bottle and tube fed only the rest that he couldn't drink anymore. And that continued till I think mid-January. So to give you a timeline, we got hospitalized at the beginning or just before December, and the second operation occurred in February, actually the 5th of February. So we had 2 months, more than 2 months in the hospital, and I'm just talking right now, I'm talking from December onwards, when we had the first cardiac catheter. I'm going to learn that one. And we weren't sure if we were supposed to stay in the hospital till mid-December somewhere. And that was, yeah, like I told you, quite nerve-wracking. And two, it was over the holidays, so then we approached Christmas, and there I had a really bad meltdown because we were back in the hospital, and I really, it's bad if I tell you it like this, but I didn't trust, or I still don't trust. I have a lot of trust in doctors and nurses, and of course I got to know them better. But with my first child, I got her in hospital, and I also had to pump milk, and because it was during the night with my daughter, I gave her to the nurses and I pumped because I just wanted a little bit of quiet to or be by myself, because the room was really narrow where we had to pump, or where I had to pump. And I gave her to the nurses, and when I got her back, she was screaming, and they were like, oh yeah, everything was fine. And I noticed that she wasn't screaming just for 2 minutes. She probably screamed the whole time I was in that little room pumping. And so that was the last time I ever gave her away to the nurses. And the same thing I felt with my son. I couldn't give him away. I didn't trust the nurses. And I know that's a bad thing for being hospitalized for so long, but yeah, it wasn't nice. It was just a feeling that I couldn't give him away. And yeah, so I really was really anxious, and I just hated being in a hospital because I wasn't the sick one, but I knew I had to be there because my son was sick. And okay, I think I try to calm down again and not ramble anymore. And so I really had a bad meltdown, and it basically was at the same point my husband gave me a card. Oh, you're doing so well, and I'm so proud of you. And I was just basically screaming at him that I wasn't doing well at all, and that he didn't notice how I felt. Still crying, I'm sorry. Okay, and from that point on forward, we had an agreement that I would stay under the week in a hospital, and he would take the weekend shifts basically, so I could do something with our daughter. And I think that's one of the that's one of the best agreements we did, because we did that for the first, or we did that from then onwards to the second operation and after the second operation. And I think if we would go to the hospital right now, we would basically do that agreement again. because I really, really need to spend time also with our grown, or not grown up, but with our daughter. And that's really bad. And for me, I've always thought she also needs some attention from me, and not only me being with her little brother. I just wanted to show her that I treasured her as well, and not only him. Okay, stop that rambling. So we stayed there during Christmas and during New Year's Eve, and basically that was really nice because the hospital was quite empty. So I think at one point we were only 3 people in the whole station that they appointed to people with born heart disorders. And yeah, that was nice because the rooms are quite tiny and you can put 2 hospital beds in them. But if you put 2 hospital beds and 2 small children beds in them, they are really cramped. And at one point I had not only 2 normal beds but a 3rd normal bed because there was another child lying next to us, also a hypoplastic left heart syndrome child who already had her 3rd operation and was doing really well, except for that one problem. But the room was just so crammed up, it was really awful. And I always had those little baby bins, I'm sorry, I don't know how to call them. They were just really short and they were also see-through. And I never used them because he was always in my bed. And there were nurses, they were like, oh, you can't put him in your bed. And I still did. And I still think for me that was the best option because there I could monitor him for myself and see how he's doing close to me. And if there was any problem occurring with him, I could realize it more faster? No, that sounds bad. I could realize it faster because he was next to me and not in a baby bin where he was away from me and I couldn't basically hear him breathing, if that makes sense to you. It makes sense to me. Okay, and another thing I did that I finally was allowed to do again was to put him in a sling, because I hated to do that with the stroller around the floor, so I had him in a sling quite often. But because they opened up his chest, you can only do that after at least 12 weeks. I think it was 12 weeks. And that's also the time when you are started to being allowed to put him on his stomach. Yeah, and he also got physical therapy in the hospital, and they were always amazed how well he was doing. And because most of the time you weren't allowed to put him on his stomach, he was a little bit late in turning to his stomach, but still the therapists were like, oh, for what he's been through, he's actually really doing great. And that was of course really nice for me to hear. Okay, so then came January and basically nothing changed except with his oxygen levels. They started to sink, and so he got this oxygen tube mask thingy. And first of all, he got a tube that always came out, and it was a big back and forth. And after basically the nurses trusted me and being responsible, I was allowed to turn on his oxygen or turn off his oxygen when his oxygen levels dropped, and they monitored it during those sticky via those, oh no, this little thing they put on a thumb, index finger or little toe, I think little toe, and with small babies also around the hand like this. Here was a monitor. And so when I noticed the levels were below what they should be, I was allowed to turn on the oxygen level just in some range. And if I would have to go over the range, I would have to call the nurses, and I had to put down when I put oxygen on and when I put it off. And yeah, and normally you're not allowed to do it. So please, if your child is ever in some kind of situations where it needs oxygen, ask the nurses to handle it. Don't do it yourself, except if your nurses allow it, specifically allow it, and you exactly know what it means. Because if a child gets too much oxygen for a too long period, it can damage its lungs, and I didn't want that to happen to my child. And so that was a big exceptions, and the nurses started to know me, and they knew that I was really caring for my child, and I started to know the nurses, and I had some favorites and some I didn't like and that was quite normal. But all in all, I was really happy to have the nurses I had, and that was everything that happened basically till his second operation. So that's that. By the end, just before the second operation, he couldn't drink anything anymore out of a bottle, so he was tube fed all the time. But everybody told me that's going to be okay, and after the operation he's going to start to drink and he doesn't need a tube anymore, and so I was hopeful for that. Okay, that's it for today, and I hope you learned a little bit, and I could show you how our journey went on till there. Okay, bye!